You could even make the argument that even if you want to believe that Republicans hated Trump so much, the larger that the population size were, they still wouldn't be able to hate him in such a perfect line.
Exactly. This is the important point. So we'll come to this in our conclusion. But people like Mitt Romney have said, well, generally Republicans are still Republicans, but they got tired of Trump, right? But you wouldn't see it in this beautiful linear straight line. It would be like a cluster, and we'll talk about that. Very good point, Benny. So that's the data. Now, before we go, we do have a fourth county, which is Wayne County, predominantly Democrat. Okay. And what you're going to see here is something quite alarming, but also spectacular, is this graph. What do you see here? Isn't this fascinating? Wayne County, in fact, it looks like at least this algorithm was not applied. Maybe they did other stuff, and we're not going to even speculate. We want to take a scientific approach here. But what you see here is, look at this. When you put the Trump line, it looked like Trump was doing 10% better. Now, these are predominantly Detroit. I would say, Benny, would you say predominantly Black communities?
So
Trump is actually doing better. He was actually doing better. And there was some evidence that a lot of the people in the Black community were moving away to Trump. Maybe not to Republican voters, but to Trump. And you see that phenomenon here. So our view is, that this algorithm, what we're talking about here, this algorithm was not applied here. Maybe something else was, we haven't detected it, but it's clear that Trump was doing better among Democrat precincts.
The other point, Shiva, is you could see that you could establish some real upper and lower control limits here, because there is the presence of a line, but with the other ones, it's going straight down. There's no such thing as an upper and lower control limit.
Right. So I mean, it's almost like we call it a transistor function, right? At a certain point, you cut off. And transistors go straight down, but this is this kind of, from an engineering standpoint, it's a ramp function. But anyway, not to get too technical, but the point is, Wayne County, we don't see this algorithm in place. So we say, quote unquote, no cheating, no algorithm applied. So that's the data. So what do the results show? Let's conclude on the results. Well, the algorithm that's there moves Trump votes to Biden. That's what it's doing. And I don't think anyone will argue with it, because we've seen Trump votes moving to Biden. The second thing is that as precincts increase with a higher percentage of Republicans, greater percentage of Trump votes are transferred to Biden. So you would think, wow, more people are Republicans in this precinct. You would think Trump would do better. In fact, it seems like going to Republican precincts was his worst nightmare. You lose more. He lost higher percentage of votes, the more Republican precincts they were. Another way to think about this is, the more the precinct was Republican, the more percent of Trump votes are transferred to Biden in that precinct. I'll repeat that. The more the precinct was Republican, the more the percent of Trump votes are transferred to Biden. And by case in point, let's just go look back here at Kent County. This very dramatic graph here. So very Republican. This is almost like 90% Republican. Trump got nearly 25% votes lost there, e.g. transferred to Biden. Okay? That's what we're looking at here. So this is just looking at the data. So the slope of the discount to Trump's votes is the same for each county. That's what's more interesting. What do I mean by that? What is the slope? Again, people, if you have forgotten algebra, right? Y equals mx. This slope, this line, this is a little bit steeper, but by and large, the slope is pretty much the same. Okay? So the slope of that line looks very similar. And that's what we wanted to make here. The slope of the discount to Trump's votes is reasonably, quote unquote, I should put the same for each county. Now, Wayne County, other result, had no algorithm we detected, right? That was just flat. And that was very much like the work that Phil did here in Massachusetts, where we looked at Franklin County. It was all hand counted. Remember that, Phil? It was all flat. We didn't see any changes. Okay. So what's the discussion? So those are the results. Let's have a discussion here. So the algorithm, we believe, is a weighted race allocation method. It's a transfer of a percent of votes from one candidate to another. As we've discussed, the percent is a weighted decimal value, and we can calculate it as we get more data. But clearly, the weighted race method, and one of the things is the weighted race, as we mentioned at the outset, is a documented feature in election systems as early as 2001. And all major vendors, We had a discussion about that, right? It's not just Dominion, it's all of them. It's not just Dominion, it's all of them are believed to have this feature. Diebold, as we showed in 2001, had, maybe it was earlier, but Bev Harris's work uncovered it was originally in the Diebold systems.
The breakup of the election industry started with Diebold, so all of the software that the other vendors probably would have used, the source code would have originated from the Diebold. The breakup of the election industry started with Diebold, so all of the software that the other vendors probably would have used, the source code would have originated from the Diebold.
This is a Diebold AccuVote TS electronic voting machine of the type used in elections in several U.S. states. We studied this machine in our laboratory at Princeton University to evaluate its security and its suitability for conducting elections. The detailed results of our study, including a full technical paper, are available at itpolicy.princeton.edu/voting. The behavior of voting machines is controlled by computer software. The software that tallies votes on this machine was written by Diebold. Our study shows that a criminal who can inject malicious software into this voting machine can control how the votes are tallied. His malicious software can steal votes, and it can cover its tracks so that the theft cannot be detected. To illustrate this danger, we have created in our laboratory a demonstration software program that steals votes. This video will show our demonstration software in operation. We will also show how a criminal can inject malicious software into a voting machine, and how he can create a computer virus that spreads itself between voting machines, injecting malicious software on every machine it infects. We will now show how to steal votes in a simulated election. On the morning of Election Day, the voting machine awaits instructions. The machine appears to be functioning normally, but unbeknownst to any observer, it contains malicious software that will steal votes. The machine greets the election workers normally. At this point, the election worker can perform so-called logic and accuracy tests that are supposed to determine whether the machine is functioning correctly. Logic and accuracy testing is essentially a pretend election. The worker casts pretend ballots, and then the machine counts the pretend votes. The election worker makes sure that the pretend count is correct. Our vote-stealing software can tell that the worker is doing logic and accuracy testing, so this is not a real election. It allows the pretend votes to be counted correctly, so that the machine passes the test. Everything still looks normal. Now the election worker tells the machine to start the election. The machine prints out a paper tape showing that no votes have been recorded yet. The election has begun. The first voter approaches the machine to cast his vote. The election workers have given him a voter card, which will allow him to cast one vote. He inserts the voter card into the machine, and the machine presents him with a ballot. In this example election, there are two candidates for president, George Washington and Benedict Arnold. The voter chooses George Washington. The machine asks him to confirm his vote, and he does so. The machine ejects the voter card after marking it as used. That's one vote for George Washington. 4 more voters cast their votes. They vote for George Washington, Benedict Arnold, George Washington, and George Washington. The correct result for this election is George Washington 4 votes, Benedict Arnold 1 vote. Election day is now over. An election worker approaches the machine, inserts a supervisor card, and tells the machine to end the election. The machine prints out a paper tape announcing the results. The tape shows that Benedict Arnold won the election, 3 votes to 2. This result is incorrect. Malicious software stole votes from George Washington and gave them to Benedict Arnold. The voting machine recorded the election results on its internal memory and on a removable memory card. A poll worker opens the side of the machine and removes the memory card. The memory card, when examined by technicians, also shows that Benedict Arnold won the election, 3 votes to 2. Every record kept by the voting machine shows the same fraudulent result: Arnold 3, Washington 2. How did this happen? The voting machine was running Diebold's election software, but it was also silently running our demonstration vote-stealing software. And our software was able to steal votes without being detected. When the election ends, the vote-stealing software can delete itself from the voting machine. No evidence remains that the machine was ever hijacked. No evidence remains that any votes were stolen. As far as anyone can tell, the election was conducted fairly. But the result is fraudulent. As far as anyone can tell, the election was conducted fairly, but the result is fraudulent. This vote-stealing attack requires injecting malicious software into the voting machine. Anyone who has access to a voting machine for a few minutes can install malicious code. Here is one way to do so. In advance, we prepare a memory card containing our malicious software. When we get a few minutes alone with the machine, we first open the side door. We can do this with a key. There are thousands of keys in circulation, and any hardware store will copy them. Even without a key, the lock is easily picked. One member of our team can consistently pick the lock in less than 10 seconds. Or we can simply remove a few screws and lift off the machine's cover. Next, we remove any memory card that is already in the machine and insert our prepared memory card. We press the power button to boot the machine. When the machine boots, it will automatically install our malicious software for us. The machine makes a musical noise when it boots, but we can suppress this noise by inserting headphones into the machine. We remove our memory card, replace any card that was there before, and close the door. Our malicious code is now installed on the machine. The total elapsed time is less than 1 minute. Due to design flaws in the Diebold AccuVote TS voting machine, it is possible to construct a computer virus that infects these machines and spreads automatically from one machine to many others. To illustrate this, we have constructed a demonstration virus in our lab. The machines use removable memory cards to distribute software updates and store the results of elections. The memory cards function similarly to floppy disks or thumb drives on ordinary PCs. Memory cards act as carriers for the virus. When a memory card is inserted into an infected machine, the machine copies the virus onto that memory card. If the memory card is removed and later put into another machine, the virus spreads from the memory card to the new machine. In this way, the virus can spread from one infected machine to an entire population of machines. The virus can carry with it a malicious payload program that is installed on every infected machine. For example, our demonstration virus carries our vote-stealing software, so that every machine that catches the virus will steal votes. A criminal could use this kind of virus to install malicious software on many voting machines, even if he has access to only a few machines, or even only one. By planting a virus far enough in advance, he can ensure that a significant number of machines will steal votes on election day. These problems, taken together, pose a very serious threat to the security of the elections conducted on Diebold AccuVote TS voting machines.
Why are more percent of Trump votes? So we want to ask some questions. You know, in science, in engineering, we have to actually solve a problem. So you have to get down to the heart of the real problem, right? We're not politicians here. Phil is an engineer. I'm an engineer. Benny's an engineer. We all program software. We can't BS our way out of talking our way out of stuff. If our software doesn't work, something's wrong. So we always have to ask some profound questions to find the heart of the issue. So one question is, why are more percent of Trump votes transferred to Biden in precincts that have more Republicans? It's an interesting question. Second question is this, are both Republicans and Democrats involved in supporting this algorithm? Interesting question, because you have Republican precincts and in Democrat precincts, the algorithm is not on. So what's going on? Are both parties involved? So, and the other question we probably need to ask, and again, this is more research, are both parties aware of such features in these voting systems? We're hearing now news, there's lawsuits against Dominion, right? That's happening, others, but, you know, are both parties aware of these features? Another question is it possible that this pattern is normal and explains a normal voting pattern? What do we mean by this pattern? We're talking about that line going, just to be clear, we're talking about that line going across and then coming down at a certain point, that pattern, line going across and coming down. Oh, you know, and in fact, for example, Mitt Romney would say, and he has said this, the pattern makes sense. He would say, look, since Republicans stayed Republican, but no longer like Trump, this could be true, right? This could be true. However, if that's the case of what Mitt Romney says, look, Republicans broadly are still Republicans, but there's a percentage of them, you know, across the board who just don't like Trump, right? They just don't like him. Trump lost votes, and that's just the way it is, okay? Well, if that were true, what would you see? You would see this.
Right.
You would see all these precincts deviating from the norm, you know, at some distribution like this, all right? But that's not what we see, right? But that's not what we see. What we see is a predictable line, a decline of dislike for Trump with increasing percentage of Republican precincts. We actually see this. We don't see this. If Mitt Romney was right, you would see this. Or if any rational person would write, oh yeah, Trump just pissed off a lot of Republicans everywhere. Well, across all precincts, you'd see this everywhere. But what we see is this. In fact, we see a beautiful line, which you could go back to your Algebra 1 class and write an equation for y equals mx plus b, and I could draw that line. I could calculate it precisely. So precisely, I could put it into a computer program. That's how precisely I could do this. And I'm sure we could do this in any function, probably in 5-10 minutes. We haven't gotten there yet. Any software engineer listening can do this. So just to be clear, Mitt, if you're listening, if what you were saying, Mitt, that would sure be like this, but the reality is like this. And I think Mitt would probably find this a little more, I would be illuminated if he could answer this in some normal means. So given that this predictable linear decline of dislike increases, it makes no sense, right? This makes no sense unless a computer algorithm was in place to lower Trump's votes as a function of percentage of Republicans in a precinct. In this case, linearly, okay? That curve, boom, it goes down beautifully linear. What we're saying is that beautiful point where it's nice and flat, Trump's actually doing well in non-Republican precincts, and then it's like a switch gets turned on and it goes down linearly. Our position is that could only be done by a computer algorithm in such a precise way over so many precincts, okay? It's not like, because over so many precincts, you'd see some random fluctuations. You don't. You see a nice little line going there. What is the chance that that pattern, let me go back here, the pattern that we're talking about is just not a computer algorithm? That was a question Phil asked you, Benny.
Yeah, I rarely would say 0%, so I maybe say 1%. If you get in trouble if you don't leave a little room for error. It's just not something you would see again. The engineering is reversing the organization of the precincts, and as they grow in size, at some point you're supposed to strike an average. So that means if we got to precincts, if they were continuing to increase and we had 100% turnout, then that number would just grow further in the size, and that line and that slope would continue to go down. And that is literally the presence of something that is not it's barely germane to something that's natural. It's something that's artificial.
So the bottom line is, this is the probability of this from any mathematical description you would call it, I'm just going forward again, is unlikely. Now, so the future research questions we have as scientists and researchers is, hey, are both parties, Democrats and Republicans, aware of this algorithmic process? Another question, is a coup underway? And who would be behind such a coup? Democrats, Republicans, or both? Or you could argue, did Biden win legitimately? That's
by
also
how
a
much?
possibility. What's up?
Did he have a landslide and we just don't know it?
Again, the questions in the future, are both parties and Democrats aware of the algorithmic process? Is there a coup underway? Who is behind such a coup? Democrats, Republicans, or both? Or did Biden win? Now, the conclusion that we have, because ultimately, why are we doing this? Why, important question left is why. I think what we all want is the inputs and the outputs today in our voting systems are unverifiable. That's the unfortunate truth we all have to deal with. And if we don't deal with that, we're sleeping. We're not being real citizens. But this is the God's honest reality. If we take away our rose-colored glasses, for far too long, we've been looking at Venezuela or Afghanistan or other countries. Oh my God, those have banana republics. But the reality is in the United States voting systems, the inputs and the outputs to our voting systems are unverifiable. That means the evidence is ambiguous.
There's research from Dr. Shiva from MIT. Dr. Shiva from MIT and his team, after doing scientific research, they are publicly challenging Biden with scientific data. Dr. Shiva said, our analysis in Michigan indicates a computer algorithm was likely to be used to transfer 69,000 votes. We are willing to subject our results to the critical and transparent review with Biden's representatives. But I don't think Biden is going to accept the challenge. Shiva's team's analysis shows that at least 69,000 Trump votes were put down as Biden votes by the Dominion software. In other words, while Trump's votes were cut by 69,000, Biden's votes were added by an additional 69,000 by the Dominion software.
What's really troubling is that we discovered that a lot of the equipment that's being sold on the market now to replace old, outdated systems is built on operating systems that are also very soon to be outdated. So there's a lot of counties and states that are spending a lot of money for new systems, and in a very short few months, those new systems are going to be on software that's end of life and no longer going to be receiving security updates. But the best way to secure our elections is to have paper ballots for all voters and to do post-election audits of those elections. And most of the country does have paper ballots. There's some states and counties that still need to move to paper ballots, and they can do that before 2020. And we can try and get meaningful post-election audits across the country before 2020.
The company is called Dominion Voting. It's used in 28 states, as reported by JustTheNews.com and John Solomon. Several days ago, Dominion came under heavy fire after allegations that their machines caused thousands of votes in one Michigan county to be switched from Donald Trump to Joe Biden.
I got